And we're live.
And we're live. Here we go. Welcome to the Business Velocity through the 5 Facets of Business podcast. We're your hosts, Dave Newell, Hannah Panuski, and with our guests, we explore actionable insights and share stories of real businesses. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness the 5 facets of your business will help you propel your growth and achieve business velocity. Hannah, who are we talking to today?
We're talking to a wonderful, wonderful person that I have recently gotten to know. You've known for quite some time. We are talking to Robert Taylor. Robert was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, and now lives in Charlotte. He has spent a majority of his career in and around the financial industry. Robert has worked with firms like JPMorganChase and Wells Fargo. He officially embarked on his entrepreneurial journey and founded the boutique mergers and acquisitions advisory firm, Bray Ventures, in 2018. Robert seeks to bring a different approach to M&A transactions for small business founders and owners. He really enjoys seeing the lasting impacts that a successful closing has on not just the founders of the business, but all their employees and stakeholders. Amen to that. Robert holds a Master of Business Administration from Wake Forest University and a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communication from UNC at Chapel Hill. I'm very excited for our listeners to hear what he has to say about mergers and acquisitions. I have learned so much just from working with their team over a short period of time. So I think this is going to be really great. Mm-hmm. Let's bring him on.
Let's do it.
How's it going?
Hey, Robert.
It's going extremely well. Even better now. Hey, guys.
Good to see you both. Happy Monday.
As always.
Yeah.
Yes, another happy Monday for sure.
Yeah. So I know you're a Chapel Hill guy. I don't know if I ever shared with you that my dream growing up was to play basketball at Chapel Hill. I wanted to be a student of Dean Smith's to play with, the Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse and Antoine Jameson. That era would have been like right around what was going on. But I would imagine as a Chapel Hill student, that's just such an epic environment to be a part of. Did you get to go to a lot of games?
It was amazing. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina. My father went to grad school at Carolina, so I always bled the Carolina blue as a kid. And it actually was the only school I applied to. I was just set on going there. And so I was very fortunate to go there. And no, I made one of the best decisions I made was I worked for the athletic department as a student assistant in the sports information office for 3 years. So I got front row, courtside, press row to all the basketball games, football games, women's soccer. My office was in the Dean Dome. It was quite the experience being there. Lots of stories I could tell. For sure.
I was gonna say, I think I know like 5 people who are pretty mad right now and jealous.
Yeah. Awesome. It was great foundation. Again, it was that was my early path, kind of sports, and I've kind of come full circle, which we may dive into. But just great. Just an amazing environment.
Yeah. Good. No, I would love to hear. So, that is your bio. That's what's on your LinkedIn. But I would love to hear from you, what led to Bray? I mean, working with Bray, I've been working with Bray now a little bit, and it's been wonderful. And so I would be curious, if you can kind of walk us into your journey of starting Bray and the work you do for your clients.
Of course. Yeah. I often say I'm sometimes the poster child of it's not the destination, but the journey. And again, like I said, in college, I was PR and marketing and sports, and graduated when the world was collapsing, the dot-com bust, 9/11. And that really altered my early career path and jump forward. I got in with financial services at JPMorganChase, was there for a while, for about 7 years. And then again, the macro economy, 08, 09 happened and everything was imploding. And so I was basically told to keep my job, I needed to move to a different part of the country. And I was just starting a family. So I said, there's got to be a different path here. And so that really was the genesis for my thinking differently. And maybe working for a large organization wasn't going to be the best path for me. But it took some time to go through that journey. And like I said, worked for Wells Fargo for many years on the trading floor, spent some time in private equity, joined a hedge fund for 3 years. And really just towards the end of that, I said, you know what, I'm tired of this world and the way that it operates. I think things can be done differently. And really sometimes the best way to take the reins and make that change is to do it on your own. So that's when I started Bray Ventures in 2018, took the leap of faith. And but that was about a 4-year journey, quite honestly. Once I sunk into an opportunity that I could focus on, building up my contacts and how I was going to eventually create that business model. Took some time, but yeah, it's been a continued journey since then.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, what was the part that scared you the most about making the leap into entrepreneurship?
It's the feeling from 100% security of, what's coming in the door every 2 weeks, having insurance, having just the sense of security from having a full-time job versus the wild, wild west of entrepreneurship. But, it was one of those things where I had a successful, up to that point, 17-year career in financial services. So it was at that point where I said, you know what, if I don't do it now, I probably won't do it. And if it doesn't work, most likely I can go back and get a job. And that was the best decision to take that leap of faith. Obviously, a lot of talks around the kitchen table. As I said, I'm a family man, 2 daughters and a wife. And ultimately it was, I think everybody kind of knew if I didn't take that leap of faith and try it, I was not going to be content with whatever I did going forward. So it's just the leap of faith. And but it was not a pure emotionally driven decision. It was definitely, like I said, years of really building the story to where it made sense. Like, okay, now it makes sense. Let's go give it a shot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's been, I know you alluded to this a little bit, but now that you've taken that leap of faith, the business has been around 6+ years, right? And I know it's, not every year is the same, but most years have been pretty darn successful for you. What's been the best part? So you made the leap, had some fear, went for it.
Yeah.
But what's your favorite part of it now?
Just being keeper of my own destiny. My father ran his own business, so I grew up in a household where one of the things that really stuck with me as a kid and to this day was my father saying, whatever you do in life, if possible, try and do it for yourself, because that's when you'll have, most control and of where you're going. And so that was something where, it took me a while to land on what that was. But to your point, I mean, every year is different. You're constantly selling, you're constantly thinking about, how do I make this business better? Who are the strategic partnerships and people that I need to, help make this business better? Because you can't do it on your own, or you can, but it's a much harder journey for sure. And just really, continuing to pivot the business if and when it makes most sense to do so, based upon whether macro impacts or customer concentration or whatever it may be. Just being agile in building the business, I think, has been a key foundation for me, and not just being complacent on this is the one way to do it, and not being able to see outside the blinders and say, okay, well, what else out here might make sense to lean into or change or integrate into the business. And that's definitely, I would say that each year, if I look back, the business has a little different flavor each year, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta imagine that so many small business owners who would listen to this would resonate with almost everything you just said. I mean, to, kind of have a similar stake in the game, as I feel like a lot of small business owners would make you very, just useful and such a resource for them. And I know, there's a lot of people in our sphere who have benefited from working with you and knowing you. So my first question for you in all of this, I would be curious from your perspective, speaking to those small business owners who are thinking about maybe an exit, what's something that you feel like too often, you come across someone who hasn't been thinking about X or doesn't understand Y? Like, what are the things that you feel like they don't get told when they're thinking about an exit?
I think the main piece of advice that when given the opportunity, I love giving is if you are truly thinking about building this business to eventually exit from,
Mhm.
you need to start making that intentional shift now.
Yep.
Too often business owners wait too long to really lean into, okay, I need or want to sell this business. Whereas if they had really made that shift and started thinking about it intentionally 2, 3, 5 years in advance, there's oftentimes a lot of things that when I get the opportunity to meet a business owner and peel away a few layers of the curtain and take a deep dive into the inner workings of their business, there are definitely things that if I had the chance or had the runway to make suggestions or bring in some people from my ecosystem of service providers to help them in making them as attractive of a business as possible when they are ready to go to market. um, I think that would be what I oftentimes see the most. But it's okay if you are in a kind of dire position or we need to go to sell, we need to move quickly. It's okay, because part of what people do that you hire as a business owner, whether that's an M&A banker like Bray Ventures, or a business broker if you're a smaller business, or even an attorney, an M&A attorney, those people are there to guide you and help you and better understand, okay, here are the things that we need to quickly massage and make it appear that it's more efficient when we get to market, because the less things that you can take to market that a buyer is going to see and perceive as risk ultimately is going to make your chances of a successful exit much higher.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, when you and I have known each other for a long time. We've
Yeah.
connected around a lot of different business owners. I think we share a lot of the same philosophies in terms of how we engage clients. Like, we want to make sure we're adding value. We're kind of bookended, right? In the sense that,
Right.
what Hannah and I do is kind of get the business organized and prepped and running like a machine and ready to go. And then, they kind of pop over to your world and you get them out into the market and you start building those relationships and connections, looking for those buyers. You mentioned then, 2 years ahead of time, 3 years ahead of time, 5 years ahead of time, like,
Yeah.
being prepared and thinking through that. Like, what are some of the things that you would love, like, if you had to, think about some clients that you've had that you're like, man, 5 years ago, if you would have done this, like, it would have made a huge
Yeah.
difference. I know, I'm sure it's industry specific and nuanced, but I'm curious, like, what are some of those things that you look back at a, client and you said, man, if 2 years ago you would have done this thing, or if you would have been more thoughtful about this piece, like, here's what would have made a huge difference for you. Are there kind of common threads there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I see is when you are ready to, like I mentioned before, it is truly an intentional shift in the way you think about your business. If you are starting to think about an exit, that's because maybe you've just been building a lifestyle business. You enjoy the perks. You've got a nice salary. You've got ownership distributions year over year. It's great. It's growing. But as soon as you say, okay, I now want to sell this business in 2 years or whatever, it's not only you making that shift in your mind and changing some things and starting to really shore up the operations, many of the things that, like you mentioned, Dave, that you and your team do with some of your engagements, but it's also you need to make sure your close inner circle is also aware and on track with your thinking. What I mean by that is I had a company, fantastic company, started in the early 90s, bootstrapped all the way up to a great 8+ figure business. And when they were ready to sell, um, we successfully got the deal sold, but they had done their taxes for the last 18, 20 years to avoid paying taxes as much as possible, which is fine, which is great. And what does that mean? That means driving expenses through the business and doing this and that. So your bottom net operating income line is as low as possible, so your tax exposure is minimized, and that's totally fine. And every business owner does that, and that makes sense. But when you go to sell, they now had a lower bottom line that any buyer is going to look at and say, well, we're going to give you a multiple based upon your profitability. And it was at that point too late to unwind the last 3-4 years of taxes to show a true net profit of the business. So I would say, and that was because they didn't tell their CPA, hey, maybe 2 years, 3 years before, really starting to think about an exit. They could have then worked very closely with that CPA of saying, I know we've been doing this. This has been our tax strategy up to this point. But maybe now that we know that a buyer is probably going to look at our last 2-3 years of financials, let's beef these up as much as possible so that when they see our bottom line, they're going to pay us a multiple on that versus what we are currently doing because we're avoiding taxes. So little things like that is really setting up not just your business to be ready for exit, but setting up you personally, whether that's through your personal wealth management plan, your tax strategy, deal with your attorneys, do you have your trust set up? There's just a lot of things in that respect that I see time and time again, where again, it's not always too late, but if you start earlier, usually the outcome is a lot more positive.
Yeah. It's not always too late, but it's never too early, right? It's maybe
exactly
a way to think
that's
about
the
that.
perfect saying. Absolutely.
The one thing that keeps coming up in our conversations, is like exiting a business. Very few, like a very small percentage of people on the planet will ever have that experience, let alone entrepreneurs who start their businesses. I would imagine 15 to 20% of business owners who start a business even have the opportunity to sell or pursue selling. And even of that number, it's probably 25% actually do it, right? Like actually find the buyer, actually find the right situation, find everything that's going on. And so if you think about it in that way, it's not something we're like trained to do, right? It's not something we're taught to do. There's not a lot of, not as many resources on that as there is, marketing books. I think if I searched marketing book, there'd be 4 million books I could read that just came out this year. But when you think about like exiting, it's just not a thing a lot of people have the opportunity to do. And it feels really foreign, So, I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is there's some mindset pieces, right? Of like, how are we even thinking about this? How are we preparing for it? There's a community aspect of let's get a circle around us kind of swimming in this direction. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the tactical things, right? Like you talked about even, tax strategy. But one of the things that I think about with these businesses, like even running your company as if you're going to sell it in the future, you start thinking a little bit more about like, well, are we trademarking things? Like, are we documenting and putting contracts around our partnerships? Like, what are some of those intangible, less tangible things than just the financials? Like, what are some of the things that make a big difference for somebody when it comes to an exit? Or what are some assets, maybe, as a way to think about it? In addition to, we just have good profitability, right? Obviously, that's like number one. People are going to look at that. But there's a much larger story at stake. When somebody's selling their company, it's ultimately a story.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And I think the best answer to your question is part of that mind shift and changing the lens by which you are thinking about or seeing your business. It's not only you need to now think of your business as building an asset that's strong, that's got core assets that can be eventually sold, but you also need to think and understand, wow, a buyer, you need to start thinking through the buyer's lens. When someone comes in here and is interested in potentially buying my business, they will uncover and look at every single document, every single standard operating procedure, every single contract, your historical financials, so it's something where from a high level, it's getting into the mentality of, if I were someone buying my business, what would I want to see? And to your point, yes, it's handshake contracts with your good buddy that you've been doing businesses for the last 20 years. That's great, but a buyer is going to see that as 100% risk because they don't know this client, they don't know this customer, If that customer and you are so tightly connected, the buyer's going to say, well, what happens when John Doe or Jane Smith leaves the business? Is that customer then also going to leave the business? But if they're contractually bound for the next year or two, then the buyer's like, okay, I don't have to worry about that. So again, it's all about what are the areas of your business that could be seen as a risk factor by any buyer. So it's contracts, it's documenting your procedures, documenting who all your employees are, having tracking data. If you can track any type of data around your business, whether it's around your customers, whether it's around your marketing spend, what's the return on any investment that you've made in your marketing? What are your customer acquisition costs? All these things that, again, you've probably glazed over or you've talked about in your quarterly meetings or as you think through it, if you've got a board or whatever. But these are the things that any buyer is going to be 100% focused on. So again, I really think it's that mind shift. It's that, okay, I've been running a great business, but what if I was on the outside looking in? What are the things that I would say, maybe that needs to be tightened up a little bit? Or maybe if they had only done this or secured this contract or been gathering this data so that I could better understand the business. I think that those are the things that, like you said, it's different for every business. It's different for every industry. But at a very high level, it just takes a really intensive step back, look at your business. It's that whole working in your business versus on your business. You really need to take in that you got to start working on your business and getting it ready for that exit.
Yeah. I think there's so many things that you just mentioned. Like, I can imagine somebody like listening to this and like writing out like a list of like, oh, these questions I need to ask myself. I need to like write all this stuff out. But what I hear a lot of in that is what I experience a lot of times as someone as a process consultant, where I come in and I kind of am shaking some things up. I'm turning the soil. I can imagine getting very overwhelmed when you start to think about all these questions and you start like, because you still have a business to run. Like any business leader still has a business to run, still has to keep the lights on, still has to maintain that relationship with the customer, and then put all this time toward this future thing that may or may not happen. And so I want to talk about like kind of the people effects of all of this and how maybe you suggest people approaching this in a way that doesn't totally burn them out. Like what is that experience like? Maybe I'll ask this just from having seen it time and time again with business owners, of just as a person trying to add on this whole other workload and for a future that may or may not happen. What is that like, and how do you cope with it? How do you make sure you're not driving yourself into the ground with this potential, amazing thing that could happen?
Yeah.
But especially if you're planning a couple of years ahead, I guess I'm thinking about like the mentality of like, how do you survive in all of that?
Yeah, great question. And that really goes to the getting down and really understanding and taking that step back as a business owner and saying, okay, what am I doing on a daily basis? If I were to peel out and really start thinking about, are the right people in place that can take over maybe some of the things that I continue to do in the business? Who could I on my team maybe start to integrate and do more things? Because again, if you're owner and you're wanting to sell because you want to retire, you ultimately are not going to be in this business for the long term. So you can start to integrate and pull in your resources and people that are already a part of your business and start giving them more, putting some more structure to maybe some of the things they do. Like, for example, if a company is, I've had this conversation many times where a business owner say, "Oh my gosh, my sales are struggling. I've got to go hire a new salesperson to get this sales platform back on track." And my pushback and feedback is, well, actually, it's not necessarily the salesperson that you need. Maybe it's you don't have the sales process that's in place. That irregardless of who's sitting in that seat, this sales process is what works for your business. But again, those are the things that are going to be, to your point, Hannah, above and beyond your normal 9 to 5, what you're doing in the business already. And it just compounds and compounds. And that's where I say, that's when you lean on maybe others, in your personal network that own businesses that have maybe sold, and ask people, hey, not necessarily I'm looking to sell, because sometimes you don't want to show that card too early,
Sure.
but start asking around and looking around, and who are good M&A advisors, or who's a good M&A attorney, who's a good coach consulting team that can come in here and help lay some of that groundwork, to where you're not bringing on more full-time people, because that's just, again, you may see that as an asset, but a buyer might see that as a liability, because you're just adding more
Mhm.
expenses. You're adding more people that maybe that
Oh, yeah.
buyer, those last 3 hires you made, maybe the buyer already has those 3 people. And so they're now going to be looking at it differently. So it's, I've said this for years, like, I love the fractional leadership space. And it's such a, um, it's such a great tool and community of people that have such great work experience, whether that's in, your fractional CFO, your fractional COO, your fractional
Yep.
chief revenue officer. But what you can do is you can bring in these really smart, tenured people into your business on a very short-term basis, to get you over those humps, to help you get ready.
Yeah.
And you're not loading on expenses, because they can parachute out of the business at any time. Um, and that really is just getting suggestions, and doing some research. Who's out there that maybe works in my industry, or sometimes maybe not in my industry, that can think about things differently, and really challenge you. But it's definitely a challenge, Hannah. And one that I say, it's like anything. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And Dave already kind of laid out the stats of how many successful businesses get sold every year. It's not easy, but it is so rewarding at the end. So are you going to take on more responsibilities and a little more during that year, 2, or whatever, getting ready? Most likely, yeah. But in the end, you're building towards this large exit that, if
Yeah.
you are successful at doing, it changes. Like I said in my bio, it changes not just your life and your family, but so many others.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
You mentioned so many things in there. I mean, I've been a fractional COO, a fractional
Hmm.
president. It's still a service that we offer, in part because, hiring a full-time COO, hiring a full-time whoever is just really expensive, right? And,
Right.
so you can get a fractional person to come in, build the system, build the processes, build the things that you need, and create the conditions for somebody else to come in and be successful, who's less expensive, or who could be a director of ops as opposed to a COO, or whatever it is. But there's so many advantages to that. So I echo that as well. We're connected to a lot of fractional folks, and it is a really great community. There's a lot of great options there. So if that is something you're looking at, please do look into that community. And, I would just echo one of the things we often say is that, hiring a person is the most expensive solution to that problem.
It really is.
Like 99.9% of the time, it's the
Yeah.
most expensive way. There's a lot of organizations that we've walked into, and it tends to follow dysfunction. Some of the dysfunctional organizations that we work with, oh, we just need more people. We just need more people. We just need more people. And it's like, that's the narrative in the company. We need more people. And to me, that's like, well, that's an indicator. Like, if I go into a company and I'm doing assessments or whatever, if I hear that on repeat, I'm like, oh, okay, this company isn't in a healthy state, because everybody's feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. And that generally means we don't have good containers, we don't have good processes, we don't have good systems, we don't have good leadership. Like, there's a lot of things going wrong that you can tweak, change, adjust, and actually probably let people go and still be more functional and more practical than bringing on more people. Like, you got to get the systems organized first. And maybe the last comment I make on what you just said is, I actually heard this the other day, and I thought it was really great from a client who's interested in selling. We've been working with them for a while, and they're like, the question they kind of brought up is, are you building a job, or are you building a business? It's like, are you building a job for yourself, or are you building an actual company? And I was like, it's just a really good way to put it, right? Am I building something where I have to work hard, where I'm actually building a job for me? Because what a buyer doesn't want to do is purchase your job, right? What they want to do is purchase your business. They want to, I don't want to come in, I don't want to pay you money so that I have more work to do. That's not a great idea. Like, I'm not going to purchase it so I have a 60-hour-a-week job that I didn't want, right? So even just, to speak to the mentality a little bit, I thought that was an interesting framework to say, even a question to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, like, am I building a business or am I building a job for myself? Right. And I think that's an interesting perspective. So building a business is systems, structures, processes, flows, those types of things that it can run without you.
Mhm.
Again, put yourself in the seat of the buyer. And that I think that shift in thinking about your business can answer so many questions. Is just you taking that step back away from the business and auditing as if you haven't been in it. You aren't as close as you are. And it really can bring to light a lot of these things that you're talking about, without question.
Mm-hmm. We throughout this conversation, there's sort of this tension that I'm seeing exist, and I think it's prevalent in a lot of ways, but maybe really strongly when you consider selling your business. This balance between like process, financials, kind of all the cold stuff, and then the people and all of the
Yeah.
like actual effects that it has on the people, right? And balancing those two things is so key to make a successful business, but then, to also, sell that business, which i.e. would be a success for sure. I know that it's something that both Dave and I always kind of have an eye on. We want to help people streamline and grow their business in a way that's really sustainable. And so when you try and do that, you have to be very like brass tacks. Have you written everything down? Do you track your money? Like very um uh rigid structural questions, very technical questions that are really important. And then also, are your people okay? Are they, putting out fires left and right? Like, is there a way for them to answer something without you in the room all the time? And I'm just realizing how much you probably have to deal with when it comes to, okay, let's have a huge conversation about all your finances and the technical pieces. And then let's talk about like what's going to happen with Susie, what's happening with John, like these people that are really affected by all the technical things that might be a mess, might not be, but then also, after the transition of selling the company. So I ramble on, I say all of that. And my question to you would be, how do you try and balance this forever ongoing tension between, the technical side of what you do for the companies that you sell, and then also the people and the real effects that sales have, whether they be good or bad on the people in the company?
Yeah. It's absolutely true. And I oftentimes, somewhat laughingly joke about it, but I almost feel I'm a therapist first and then a banker
Mhm.
second.
Mhm.
Um, and and I actually love that, quite honestly. I think banking, from the blocking and tackling, running numbers. I mean, numbers are numbers. You can't
Mhm.
really. I mean, they are what they are. And I almost call that side of our business kind of the commodity.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but the way that I've built my firm and how we focus on our client relationships is, let's put on our advisor hat, our consultant hat, our therapist hat first, because it is absolutely a very emotional
Mhm.
transaction for the
Yeah.
business owner
Yeah.
and their partners and their employees. And it's one of the most challenging yet often asked questions I get is, when do I tell my employees we're doing this? How do I handle their expectations? How do I? And again, it's a case by case situation. You have to be very cognizant of those emotions that are in play, because again, when a business owner is selling a business, sure, they're selling the assets, they're selling the profitability, they're selling the contracts, but they're also finding a new home for not just their, these aren't employees. Oftentimes, if you've been running the business for 20, 30 years, these
Yeah.
are your family members, and you're like handing them over to a new family. And so I think so much of my job that we take on and we take a lot of pride in is working through that emotional side first, and
Mhm.
really help to level set those expectations. Because if you're coming in all over the place and you aren't truly vested in the why of why us getting to the point of why are you wanting to sell, I think is the most important question to ask. It's not when we get presented with an opportunity to work with someone, we're looking to sell. The first question is not, great, what's your revenue? What's your profitability? The question is why? And that, I think, just uncovers and unpacks so many things that helps answer a lot of questions about how we can be successful in our job and helping that business owner achieve those goals. Because if you're just saying, I want to sell my business just because I'm tired, I'm like, well, that's really, let's go a little bit deeper and really understand what's the goal here, what's motivating you, because that really then backs into the process for how we go about selling and answering a lot of those questions and handling those relationship and the conflict on bringing in the people. And so, yeah, it can be, I mean, I've spent hours on a phone call with a business owner, not talking anything about numbers, but just about the impacts that this is going to have on their life, their spouse, their kids, their employees. And that's okay. That's part of it. Like, don't hide from that, because in the end, if you don't face that up front, then you're just setting yourself up for failure, because unless and until you have clear and defined expectations of what you want out of this process, going through it without that, it's going to be almost too big of a burden to weigh on you, and you may just in the end pull away because it's too much.
Yeah, you gotta look at all of it, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's really powerful, and I'm just going to insert this. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to insert it because I think it's something you and I have talked about quite a bit recently.
Sure.
But maybe from a little bit of a broader perspective, when you're looking to sell your company, there's ultimately three things to solve for, right? One of those pieces is the financials. Like, do our books make sense? Like, do we actually have the numbers, and are they clean, and have they been taken care of? And like, we've been thoughtful about that. So like, the financials do have to be there. And that is like technical thing number one. Everybody, when they think about an M&A transaction, they're like, yeah, tell me about the numbers. So that's obvious, right? Number two is the integration piece, which you and I've talked about quite a bit, which is how hard is it for us to absorb this business? Like, is it easy for us to take this business on? Meaning, like, do they have processes? Do they have contracts in place? Do they have good operating systems? Like, is the CEO working 60-hour weeks grinding away, or do they have it pretty streamlined where we could replace that position? Like, that integration piece is really powerful. And then the third piece, and maybe my last question to you here, is the strategic story piece, right? Which is, and how does our business fit into the landscape of what's happening in the market right now, right? And so it's not, it's kind of like, whoever buys your company is going to be the biggest sale in the history of your company. It's your biggest client ever, right? It's kind of a way to think about that is, how are we positioning our business in the greater landscape of what's happening in the market? Like, who's buying this type of business now? And maybe, that's not always a one-to-one correlation, right? Like, a tech company doesn't always need to sell to a tech company. Like, a tech company could sell to a magazine company or a whatever, because they want to get into that space, but they don't want to build the whole team from scratch. So maybe just touch on that last piece a little bit. We kind of covered the first two, I think, but touch on that last piece a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, definitely, Dave. I think it goes back to the point I just made, is setting very clear expectations of what you want out of this transaction. For any business owners listening to this, just know that selling your business doesn't mean you're selling 100% of the business, you're tossing your key over the fence and you're done. There's so many different ways and avenues that you can approach selling a business. You can stay in the business. You can sell 70% of the business and retain 30% with the new buyer, and reduce your role and continue moving forward because you like how this buyer is thinking about your business. You can sell to your employees. You don't have to sell to an outside person. And so I think to your point, Dave, is really, unless and until you truly understand what do I want to get out of this transaction, you really can't answer those questions, because they are going to be so unique and so different. But I promise you, I've seen, every scenario under the sun, and probably there's some out there that I haven't seen. But once you put guardrails around, okay, here's my ultimate exit, here's my perfect ending, You then take that and look at the market and say, okay, well, who are the types of buyers that can achieve this goal for us?
Yeah.
Is it, I want to sell 80% of my company, roll some equity, and have a second bite of the apple because I know who's going to buy me, is going to sell this business again in 3 to 5 years. All right, well, let's look at some private equity buyers. Or it's, I want to find a home for my employees because I haven't been able to offer them benefits. I haven't been able to give them this or that. And a larger strategic company that does what we do, or we fit a gap that they maybe have, and they call it a tuck-in or an add-on. And you as the owner can elevate out or maybe go up to a board position. Well, then that's thought of as more like a corporate or a strategic buyer.
Yeah.
Or your company is, you are the CEO and you're just tired, you're done. And you just want a new CEO to come in and own the business, much like you have over the last however long you've run it. Well, then maybe selling to another individual, if you own 100% of your business, is the right. And those are oftentimes called independent sponsors, people that have a background in an industry, that have capital and want to go buy a company. So I think that there's so many different types of buyers that once you understand what your ultimate goal is, you can go out and find that. And it helps to really hone in your process. If you do hire a banker, or you just hire an attorney, or you do it on your own, doing that upfront research and really understanding your ultimate exit goals, again, will bring clarity to a lot of those kind of third bucket questions that you were just outlining, Dave.
Yeah.
That's great. I realize both of us could ask you so many questions about this whole world. I think especially because I think the three of us are very, we would view a lot of this from very similar perspectives, but this has been so good. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today.
Always. No, of course. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Any where can people find you?
Yeah. So Bray Ventures is our firm. So Bray Ventures with an S.com. My email is robert@brayventures.com. Obviously, I'm a resource. I've told Dave, I've told Hannah, I've told everyone in my ecosystem, I never turn down the opportunity to talk to someone, even if it's not the right fit. I've seen so many different stories, both the good and the bad, that if I can spend 30 minutes or an hour talking to someone and maybe we're not the right fit or they're not ready, if I can help them go down or help define that path of where they need to go, then that to me is that a massive ROI on my time. So please encourage anyone to reach out if they ever have any questions about this process or their business specifically. Happy to be a resource.
That's
absolutely awesome. Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate that perspective. I think we share that. We align around that for sure. Well, thanks so much, Robert. We'll drop you off here. We'll put all that contact information in the show notes as well. So if anybody's watching this later, they can just click a button and get access to you. But thanks so much.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I really do think I could sit and talk for several more hours. That whole world is honestly very interesting to me. It's not something that I know a lot about, but having worked with both of you guys now, I am very fascinated by it. There's so much there.
Yeah. And I think the point is, there's so many good nuggets that Robert shared in there.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of it is the mentality. A lot of it is just how do you even think about your business, whether you sell or not? It's a healthy mentality to have, right? Look at your business as if somebody was going to be buying it. And it just helps you sharpen the saw. It helps you think about different ways that you can organize yourself or get contracts or do anything like that, right? Just how am I organizing my business in a way that it could sell if we wanted to at some point in time? Doesn't mean you have to. And then if you go through that transaction, one of the things that I've valued about getting into that world a little bit more is it is scary. It is big. It's not a thing you're going to do very many times in your life unless you're, kind of a pretty serial entrepreneur who's really targeted in that direction. But for a lot of folks, it's scary. It's a lot of unknowns. So having a good advisor, having somebody like a Robert on your team who can help you, like you mentioned, be a therapist at times and do the technical at times, just a great asset.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, and how lovely is it to have someone like him who's so approachable and so kind and so
Yeah.
understanding of the human impact.
Yeah.
I highly recommend anybody who listens to this who's thinking about this journey for themselves reaching out to him because he's a lovely guy. It was great to have him. So
Yeah.
very cool. Well, shall we?
We shall.
We shall. Thank you for joining us on Business Velocity. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out our framework at theevolveddifference.com. It is designed to help you clean your business up if you are thinking about this journey for yourself. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve velocity. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.